there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily, and today we're going to set up all my January book pages in my reading journal, put together my January stats pages, update some of my yearly pages with my January reads, and set up my February intro page. I read 12 books in January, so this video might be on the longer side, just fair warning. I'm also going to flip back and forth some with a few of my yearly pages as I go to update some of those, which I usually do off camera, but I decided it would be fun to give you some more insight into how those pages are progressing throughout the year. Okay, starting off, I'm actually updating my calendar page of my January reads first up to the first day I was doing the bulk of the reading journal stuff. For this page, I'll go through and pick a different color to go with the cover of the book usually and fill in the day I started and finished each book and everything in between. Or if I've only started the book up to the date I'm setting up, I'll fill in everything from the start date to the current date. Generally, I use the first 2 rows for physical reads, the middle 2 rows for digital reads, and the bottom 2 rows for audio reads. Then I also write the name of each book over the colored blocks, so I 100% know which durations are for which books. This isn't really tangible information, but I do think it's quite fun to see how long different kinds of books take me to read. Getting into my actual reads, the first book I finished in January was Slewfoot by Brom, which is technically a horror book, although I personally would classify it as a fantasy with some horror elements, about a woman in colonial New England whose husband dies, after which a mysterious creature who calls himself Slewfoot begins watching her. This book is very witchy and very focused on nature and nature magic, so in order to tie in with the vibes of the cover of the book and also tie in with that nature magic and witchy vibes, I pulled out some neutral colored flower PET stickers, and then I also grabbed some of this brown mortar and pestle scrapbook paper for the background. For the header fonts, I did a really simple print in this light brown color. For my rating system, this is loosely based off the CAWPILE rating system developed by Bookish Roast here on YouTube, but I swapped a couple of the items and have a genre-specific category. I'll probably make a video just about my rating system at some point soon, so I can just tag that in the future, but essentially I just replaced the intrigue with uniqueness and the L with the genre-specific category, and I doubled the enjoyment rating to get my average. For horror books, the genre-specific category is S for suspense. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars overall. I liked the beginning and I liked the end, but the middle bit felt very drawn out and felt like it was kind of going in circles a bit for a lot of that middle chunk. I also wanted a bit more tangible character development. I feel like the character development we got both from our main character and Slewfoot was very surface level and very predictable, and I wanted to go a little deeper. I also felt a little weird about the mismatch between the setting and the themes and the type of magic we were exploring and the way we were exploring it, but I don't think this author really could have done much about that besides changing the setting to not anywhere in the Americas. Overall, I just felt a bit disappointed in this book with what it decided to explore and how it was exploring it. I also tried to write down at least one quote in my reading journal for every book I read, but I found 2 for this one, which were, "That is not what you want. That is what you need. You are not made of needs. You are made of your dreams and desires. What is it you wish and dream of?" And what if it is not that simple? Samson asked. Can a god not be both slayer and shepherd, reward and vex? Does your god only do good? Next up, I read Release Me by J.L. Seekers, which is the 3rd book in the New Haven series, which is an ongoing interconnected romance series centered on the fictional city of New Haven. This book follows a former sex worker who has escaped an abusive situation and is trying to build a new life for herself when she applies to a job at the hotel owned by our MMC, who is the oldest son in a rich investment family. For the Revive Me books, which are the 2nd installment in the New Haven series in my journal last year, I did black paper and some of my white and black washi tapes, so I decided to keep the same decoration theme for this book as well to tie into the cover, but also just to keep the series pages a little bit cohesive between my journals. Most of these washi tapes are old washi tapes from the initial washi tape launch from Shop ARL, so you cannot buy these ones anymore, unfortunately. For the headers, I did a brush lettered font in a peachy pink color to match the me part of the title on the book, since that's the one element of color on the book cover for all the books in this series. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I think the setup of this book was quite well done, and I generally liked the characters and the ways they interacted with each other, but I had some real issues with the actual plot of the story. The plot in the second half of the book dove into a realm that was really unbelievable in the way that it resolved, and the way the plot played out also forced both of our main characters into very specific and weird gender roles, even though the characters' internal monologues and the ways they interacted with each other kind of rejected these gender roles. So there was a very weird and distracting disconnect between the characters' emotions and feelings and their actions in regards to the overall plot that I just couldn't get over. For this book, the quote I wrote down was, "I have questions about her soul, about the pain it holds and the joy it might find intertwined with mine. I have thoughts in my mind I only want to share with her, secrets I don't even know yet that can only be heard by her ears and seen by her eyes." Flipping the page, the next book that I actually read in January was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, but this was a reread and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with this page, so we're going to briefly skip over that page and move into the next book I read, which was The Princess Knight by Kate Jacobs. This is a romantasy book that is very Legally Blonde-esque in the initial plot setup. This book follows Clea, who is a princess who has been unofficially betrothed to the prince of the neighboring kingdom for quite a while, and he is coming for a visit with his whole retinue where everyone expects that he will officially propose, but he blindsides Clea when he says he needs a queen who can be a warrior and goes off to the prestigious military academy of the continent. Clea decides the best way to help her kingdom in the possibility of an oncoming war is to follow the prince to the school and prove to him that she can be a warrior to salvage the alliance between their two kingdoms. But the curriculum proves to be more rigorous than she anticipated, so she seeks out the help of the most accomplished warrior at the school, none other than the prince's captain of the guard. For the decoration of this page, I picked a couple of pink scrapbook papers I have to match the cover, but the author has also commissioned several pieces of art featuring the wide cast of characters in this book, so instead of grabbing random stationery items to decorate this page, I instead printed out 2 of these to put in my reading journal on my little mini printer. One of these pieces features Clea, the prince, and the captain of the guard, and the other features Clea's best friend, Clea's best friend's love interest, and the prince's new fiance. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. I was super pleasantly surprised by this book. I went in kind of expecting that the romance elements of this book would very clearly take up the majority of the focus and the setting would just be lightly fantasy, but this book is much more of an even romance fantasy split. There is a lot of politicking going on in this book, and there is also quite a bit of world building going on that was quite shocking and impressive to me. I really enjoyed all of the fantasy elements a lot, and also really adored the romance that developed in this book and the way it played out. My one minor critique of this book is it was published as a standalone, and for a standalone book, there are quite a few minor plot threads that are nowhere close to being wrapped up. Otherwise, I felt like this book was pretty perfect. I wrote down 2 quotes for this book, which were, "Don't cling to the familiar to avoid potential pain of the unknown. It will come for you whether you are ready or not." And, "But gratitude did not equal fealty. I owe you nothing, not anymore." Now, jumping back to the previous page for The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, like I mentioned, this was a reread for me. I decided to reread it because the movie is coming out this summer, and I first read it pretty much right when it came out, and since then, this book has had a lot of discourse about it, and I was genuinely curious if I would have a super different opinion of it now than I did when I first read it, as I have developed my critical reading skills quite a lot since I read this book. After reading it, my opinion did change a bit, but not enough that I felt the need to go through and re-rate this book with my official rating system and all, so there was no need for my kind of standard setup of the page where I write my thoughts. Instead, I decided I would just find some fun fan art and make it a little more decorative than my usual setups and just write down my thoughts in general and how my opinion had changed since the first time I read it. For my headers, for my more metric-based information, I did just blue brush lettering, and I did include my original star rating, which was 4.5 stars, but I didn't include this as a rating in my end of month stats, and also in my book tracker, I colored this in with the NA color instead of the 4.5 star color, since this was a reread. And I also added reread to the bottom of the thin column on this page in the same header font and color. As far as my thoughts on this book, I still enjoyed it for the most part. In case you don't know, this was originally Raylo fanfic that was published traditionally and is Ali Hazelwood's debut published work and is a fake dating setup. If you've never heard anything about Ali Hazelwood's books or never read one, they're almost all very science focused. In this case, our FMC is a PhD student and our MMC is a college professor. In general, I think the emotional dynamic between these two and the way their relationship develops is quite sweet. My biggest critique of this book has to do with the physicality of both characters, which I definitely didn't notice as much the first time around, but was much more obvious to me this time around. This book does quite a lot of emphasis on how huge and giant the MMC is and how teeny tiny the FMC is in every aspect, even though she's supposed to be above average height for a woman. I don't really love this choice, but this is a very fanfic thing, and I have read one other Ali Hazelwood where that is definitely not emphasized as much, so I think it was kind of a carryover of this being a fanfic and being Raylo specifically, and being Ali Hazelwood's first published work, then being something that she continuously writes in her books, but nonetheless, this is really over the top in that aspect in this book. I also find the extensive discussions on how malnourished and bony the FMC is because she's a grad student to be quite frustrating and unsettling, especially because I think there are much better ways to explore how much of a struggle academia can be besides kind of glorifying and praising being malnourished. Overall, my issues weren't strong enough that I felt the need to rewrite this book, but I think if I had rerated it just based on my opinions today, it would have been more in the 3.5 to 4-star range. Flipping to the next set of spreads, the next book in January that I read was Reclaim Me by J.L. Seegers, which is the last released installment in the New Haven series. I think there's supposed to be 2 or 3 more after this one, but I think this is going to be my stopping point in this series. This book is a second chance romance, which is always an uphill battle for me. They're one of my least favorite tropes in romance, and it's hard for me to believe that if the characters ended the relationship fully in the first place, that they have grown and changed enough to re-enter the same relationship. And while I think in general this book did convince me that these two were different enough to re-enter a relationship, this had a slew of other issues that I could not get past. In general, with this series, I feel like I've liked each installment less than the last one, so I just feel like I'm at the point where I don't want to keep reading them anymore, and since this is the latest one that's released, it seems like the perfect stopping point. As far as the decor, I kept it almost exactly the same as the Release Me spread I just did, so I don't feel like I need to talk about that too much. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. This book opens up immediately in the prologue with the FMC cheating on her hour's new fiance with the MMC, and I feel like I kind of knew from that point that I wouldn't love this book, but I still gave it a chance. In order for cheating to ever not make me feel disappointed in the characters in a book, there has to be a pretty good reason for why cheating is the only option. The guy the FMC is dating isn't the greatest. He's kind of selfish, but she also could pretty easily leave the relationship at the point that she cheats with the MMC. So I feel like the cheating was just in there for fun. I also didn't like the way that the entire blame for the relationship ending the first go around was placed on the MMC. And while I do believe he should shoulder the majority of the blame, there is also some pretty significant stuff that the FMC does that leads to the events that cause the split, and I don't think her or the MMC ever hold her accountable in any way, which was disappointing to me. This book is also really weird in that all of the MMC's character developments happen off-page prior to the start of them renewing their relationship, and almost all of the FMC's character development happens off-page between the end of the book and the start of the epilogue, so you don't really get to see a lot of the character development and are kind of just expected to buy that it happened. With all that being said, there were some parts of this book that I did enjoy. I enjoyed the actual relationship dynamic between the two main characters if you take out that whole cheating aspect. Also, really enjoyed their daughter. She was very much written as a kid that is an actual character instead of a kid that is a plot device, which I find pretty frequently is not the case in romance books with kids. So that was refreshing. Overall, I enjoyed, I think, the core of the relationship, but pretty much everything else outside of that weakened the book for me. I did manage to find a quote in here, so that was, want to talk about it? You always say that sharing your feelings with a grown-up you trust can help you feel better. I'm not a grown-up, but you can trust me. Next up, we're getting into the Game Changers series by Rachel Reed, which did make up half of my reads this month. I did read one other book not in this series this month, but most of the rest of the reads are this series, so do with that information what you will. Also, apologize for the weird recording on this page. I paused the recording to make some custom stickers on my computer for these books and forgot to resume the recording until like halfway through this page, so sorry about that. In case you've managed to somehow not see anything about the Heated Rivalry show, the second book in this series, along with most of the first one, was adapted into a TV show. This first book, Game Changer, follows Scott, who is a hockey player in a bit of a rut, and Kip, a worker at a smoothie shop toying with applying to grad school. Scott wanders into the smoothie shop one day and somehow he plays a fantastic game that night. So he keeps going back to the smoothie shop every game day to keep his winning streak, and it doesn't hurt that he maybe finds that the smoothie shop worker super cute. For the decor for this page, I pulled out some scrap paper that mostly matches the same colors as the cover. One of them is blue and orange and white plaid kind of thing, and the other is blue circles, which I thought were in theme with the blueberry smoothie of it all. I also decided for all these books to make my own little stickers to represent the books a bit, which led to this page not being recorded all the way. For this book, I only made one because I also had this blueberry PET sticker that I could use, but the little custom sticker is a hockey jersey with blue, red, and white for the colors of the team Scott plays for. For the headers, I'll keep the same font for all 6 of these books, which is a blocky all caps font, but the colors are changed up a bit. For this one, I did a lighter blue as this is the lightest blue book. Most of the books do have various blue covers, so be prepared for lots of blue for the rest of these spreads. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. The story is pretty predictable and standard in this first one and kind of follows the main beats of many other romance stories. But the biggest thing that brought this rating down is in this first one is that the writing is especially bad in this first one, in my opinion. I think the rest of the books just have pretty middle of the road writing, but the writing in this first one was bad to the point that it was distracting me from the actual story. So fair warning on that for this one. Besides that, I do like the overall relationship that develops between Scott and Kip, even though this is like relationship speed running. But like I said, it is probably one of the 2 most basic relationship dynamics of the 6 books. And I would say the characters also don't go through as much character development as some of the characters in the other books, but the plot that happens in this book is really critical to the rest of the series. So kind of a give and take there. I wrote down 2 quotes for this one. So those are, he couldn't fall in love, couldn't share with his teammates the stories of dating and marriage and children. He could try to fill that void with everything that made his life exciting and enviable, but that void always remained, always gnawing away at him. And because he just lit up like the goddamn sun, Jesus, you guys are doomed. All right, next up we've got the Heated Rivalry page. This book follows 2 hockey players who are thrust into a rivals situation based on being drafted at the same time, being drafted to arch-rival teams, and constantly being pitted against each other in various all-star games and being talked about as rivals, everything like that, but are also secretly in a 10-year-long situationship. As far as the page decor, I did another one of the personalized sticker things. This one I did 2 hockey sticks crossing to represent the rivalry, and I edited the colors up a bit. So one stick is the colors of Shane's team, and one stick is the color of Ilya's team. I also pulled out some scrapbook papers. Specifically, I did this blue watercolor one that always feels like water to me, and then also this red and yellow diamondy one that ties into the cover pretty well. I also decided to pull out some plain colored washi tapes I have in each of the team's colors, so red and blue for one direction and yellow and black for the other direction. I unfortunately don't have any plain black washi tape, so I used this grid black washi tape so that I could do this. For the headers, like I said, same font for the whole series, but the color I picked for this book is a medium, somewhat less saturated blue to match the cover as much as possible. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. I really adored it, but that is also a little bit colored by how masterful I think the show is, since I obviously read this after I watched the show. I tried to separate the two as much as possible, but I don't think it's really entirely possible to consume both pieces of media separate from one another because the show is such a faithful, almost beat for beat adaptation of the book. I adored getting to spend such a long period of time with these characters and really see them through such a wide spectrum of their lives and see how they grew up and grew closer and learned about themselves and each other. The only thing that really brought this down a bit was the writing. Even though it's not distracting in this book at all, it still isn't adding anything to the book by any means and is very just middle of the road. For this book, I again wrote 2 quotes, which were, "He had the most ridiculous urge to send Ilya a text that just said, 'I love you.' He had these words trapped inside of him, filling every part of him, and the strain of keeping them from slipping out was getting harder to endure. And he wanted to tell Shane that the closest he felt to home was when he was with him." The next book I read was Tough Guy, which is the 3rd book in this series. This one follows one hockey player who is an enforcer but kind of hates his role in hockey, who is traded pretty much every season and feels very alone, and is also dealing with the ramifications of a panic attack he had at the end of the previous season when he runs into a crush from his childhood and they reconnect and rekindle the flame. This book is the only book in this series that doesn't have some variation of blue for the main color of the cover, so I got to have a bit more variety on the decor of this page. I used some plaid purple scrapbook paper and then also pulled out a bunch of stickers and tape from my Notebook Therapy Academia set because that set has a lot of items that are music themed and the love interest in this book is a musician. For my little custom sticker, I did a violin, which is the main instrument our musician plays, and a hockey helmet. For the headers and such, I did a purple to tie into the cover in the same blocky lettering. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I really liked the characters and I really liked what this book was trying to do and the whole premise of it and everything. I really liked that we were kind of straying away from hockey culture a little bit and that we got to see someone kind of contending with how hockey culture was pretty directly negatively impacting them. But I think the way that the 3rd act breakup happens in this book made me lose almost all faith I had in this being a healthy and lasting relationship. If the 3rd act breakup hadn't happened at all, or had happened even in a slightly different way, my opinion on this book would have been much higher because I really did love the characters and the journey they went on, but it was just quite hard to move past my feelings on the 3rd act breakup specifically. It kind of negatively tinged a lot of the other moments in the book in a way that I didn't really love. I also think the writing in this one specifically was slightly weird just in the intimate scenes in a way that none of the rest of the books really are, which was slightly distracting, but not really that much of an issue to me as I kind of ignore the writing quality in intimate scenes a lot of the time. The quote I ended up writing down for this one was, "It's okay to use your talent to create happiness rather than wealth. It's okay to not use your talent at all. Fuck anyone who says otherwise." Moving right along, next up we have Common Goal. After this book, we'll have a brief reprieve from this series, but this book follows a goaltender who is planning to retire at the end of the current season, but hasn't told any of his teammates or any of his friends. that he is planning to retire, and he's recently divorced his wife, who's been married to pretty much his entire adult life. And it follows him mostly wanting to explore his bisexuality and re enter the dating world with the help of a much younger bartender who maybe has a little crush on his best friend's fiance. For the decoration of this page, I went with a much more teal tinged palette because the cover of this book is much more greeny in tone than the rest of the books. I also ended up grabbing a sticker from a set I have that is a bunch of different famous pieces of art because the love interest in this, in addition to being a bartender, is also a grad student in art and art history. For my custom sticker, I did a hockey net and a cocktail mixer. For the headers, I did a teal color to match in with the other decor and the cover. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I enjoyed the main characters, and I really enjoyed the way this discusses the main character's mentality towards his body and knowing when to kind of leave something behind on your own terms instead of pushing yourself to your absolute limits at the detriment of your own health, mental and physical. I did enjoy how the relationship started between these two as well. I really enjoyed how the main character's bisexuality was discussed by all of the characters as well. No one ever questions him being bisexual, even though he has only been with women prior to this book since he was married pretty much his whole adult life. But this book is also not really him coming to terms with or realizing his bisexuality. He is very grounded in and sure of his bisexuality, and I really, really appreciated that. My biggest complaint with this book is that there is only one conflict keeping these two apart the entire book, and that is their age gap. And only our main character can't go over it for the entirety of the book, and he just keeps flip flopping constantly and going in circles. And I think it was fine when the relationship was starting out, but it just keeps going on for the entire book and got really old really fast for me. I also do think, outside of the main character's bisexuality and the age gap, this relationship of all the books in this series is maybe the least interesting, and I wanted something more interesting to hold on to or to develop between these two besides them just arguing about their age gap all the time. Overall good, but could have been much better in my opinion. For this book, I wrote down the quote: Eric wondered what that felt like, to love a person so deeply that you become braver for it, become better. The next book I read is not from the Game Changer series, and that book was The Center by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. This is a literary fiction novel with somewhat of a mystery undertone that follows our main character, Anissa, who is a translator that dreams of being a great translator of great works, but has only translated books that she kind of deems beneath her and knows won't really make her largely recognized. One day, her boyfriend comes clean and tells her that when he's on business trips, he's actually somewhere called the Center, where you can learn a language in 10 days. It's very secretive, and each person admitted can only ever recommend one person to study at the center in their lifetime, and he uses his referral on Anissa. The majority of the book follows Anissa on several trips to the center and her questions revolving around how the center is able to do what it does, while she forms a somewhat strange relationship with the center's curator. For the decor for this page, I mostly went with an academia kind of vibe since the majority of this book is about translation and language and learning, but I also have all these different door stickers that I decided to use because there is kind of a lot of symbolism around doors in the center, even though the doors in the center very much do not look like this door I picked, and I picked this door because it matched the theme more than it matched the description of the doors in the center. For the headers, I did a dark pink color and some brush lettering. Even though the title of the book on this cover is a print font, I decided to do brush lettering because I thought it fit the vibes better. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I really, really wanted to love this book because I find language in translation and learning new languages and the inaccuracy that always comes from translations really interesting. And I quite enjoyed the themes this was exploring in the first half around class and the ways that higher classes will always take advantage of the lower classes in order to further their own wealth and knowledge and privilege. But the second half of this book got really weird, and I think based on the things that were revealed, this would have been a lot better as a horror book. and I think I would have been able to explore a lot of its themes more thoroughly. And I also think the way the entire book ended and the path that the main character decides to go down ultimately negates all of the theme work and character development that had been done in the entire book. And I really don't like that the takeaway of this book is the best way to disrupt the system is to become a part of it and not do anything else. The quote I wrote down for this book is quite long, and that is, "There was no point," he'd said to me again and again, "if I wasn't going to commit." I thought this was, I don't know, somewhat cowardly, that we needed to let our feelings emerge naturally and follow them, do their bidding, not the other way around. Ultimatums, well, ultimatums are an insult to the heart. In Adam's mind, intimacy only came from deep commitment, but mine, it was the other way around. Commitment could only come from deep intimacy. Maybe this was the fundamental problem between us. Before we move into the last couple of books, this was as far as I got in my first session of updating my reading journal for the month. I hadn't finished the last 2 books yet, so we're going to pop up to my yearly pages and add all these books so far to my book tracker. For my book tracker, I color in the box with the color that goes with the rating I gave the book, or in the case of the Love Hypothesis, with the NA color, and then put printouts of the book cover in each square as well. On to the last 2 books of the month. Next up, we have Role Model Back into the Game Changer series. This book follows a star hockey player who is suddenly traded to a new team after his ex-best friend hockey player is accused of sexual assault by many women, and a video of him berating his friend and siding with the women goes viral. But the new team is a lot different than his old team and surprisingly welcoming to him, even though he feels like he's an awful person for not recognizing who his friend was before these women came forward. And the social media manager is especially kind to him and tries to wrap him into the team fully. For the decoration, I used some blue and red scrapbook paper just to match the cover mostly. I also used some coffee stain stickers I have because a lot of the relationship starting to bud is based on the main character bringing coffee to the social media manager all the time. For the custom sticker, I did hockey skates with a phone because our love interest is the social media manager. I also added this gold apple sticker because I really wanted something apple on this page because the love interest's family owns an apple orchard and they talk about it all the time. And also the main character brings the love interest an apple themed gift after they travel for one of their games before they're really in a relationship yet. But I didn't have any regular apple stickers. This gold apple was the only one that I had. For my header color, I did a dark but very saturated blue. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. I loved the redemption arc our main character goes on throughout this book. He features in one of the previous books in this series and is kind of a piece of shit in that book because he's still kind of using his ex-best friend as a shield to hide behind. He knows he's gay and is in a secret relationship that ends right before the start of this book. And he's very, very afraid of anyone ever finding out, not only because of hockey culture, but also because he knows that his dad will disown him and he's always been surrounded by these toxic men. And so instead of trying to be better than them, he kind of becomes one of them and hides behind that facade until these women come forward and he realizes that in hiding and thinking he's protecting himself, he's, if not directly hurting other people, enabling other people being hurt, and at the very least, not stopping other people from being hurt. So this whole book is really about him finding people that he cares about on his new team and who fully support all of who he actually is, and him standing up to the hockey league and hockey culture fully, and him realizing that he's not guilty for his best friend's actions, and him finding ways to make up for the way that he was prior to this book. And I think there's just so much character development he goes through, and I absolutely adored him by the end of the book. I also think that the relationship between the two main characters was done so beautifully. It blossoms so naturally and develops into such a sweet and tender relationship. And the love interest is so understanding and welcoming of our main character. And I think these two are just so perfect for each other and are able to be exactly what the other person needs. And I loved their relationship a lot. Again, the only thing that knocked this down a bit was the writing, as it is still just very middle of the road through all of these books. I wrote down 2 quotes for this book, which were, "Sometimes it's hard to stop caring about someone, no matter how much you know you should. And it wasn't fucking fair that this was how Troy felt he had to live. To love in secret." And last, but very much not least, we have The Long Game. This follows the same couple as Heated Rivalry, but follows them after they've accepted that they love each other and are trying to be in a full-on relationship, but they're still playing for different teams and keeping their relationship a secret from the public, and only a few of their friends and family know. And it's just really about them struggling with the secrecy of it all and trying to figure out how to be in a full relationship when no one else in the world can know. For the decoration of the page, I did mostly blues for the paper to just match the cover, but I did bring forward the washi tape thing I did for Heated Rivalry, but the colors are slightly different since one of our main characters is playing for a different team now. I decided for my custom sticker to do a similar thing where I kept the crossed hockey stick, but changed up the colors of one of them, and then also added a little dog in the middle because one of our characters gets a dog in this book, and it's quite cute. For the headers, I picked a lighter blue to match most of the cover, but also to differentiate it from the previous page. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. I really adored reading this book. It is very impactful and heartwarming to get to explore these 2 characters being in a fully committed and honest relationship after they've been kind of denying their feelings to themselves and to each other for a decade. This book is also very feelings heavy. 90% of this book is just exploring the impact that keeping the secret has on both of the characters and how they're dealing with the hardship of that. I will echo what many people say about this book, which is that this book is much more unbalanced in the character focused and development than Heated Rivalry is. The author has a very clear favorite in this whole series, as one of the characters in this book and Heated Rivalry pops up in every other book in the series, but that also continues on in this book where the focus is very much on him and his feelings, and the other character is not really explored, even though he fully deserves to be, and it is very clear in the way that he acts and the bits we do get of his internal monologue that keeping this secret and the poor reaction of people around him is weighing extremely heavily on him. So it's a bit disappointing that we really don't get to explore his feelings as much as they deserve to be explored because the author has a clear favorite. So that's the main thing other than the writing that keeps this from being a perfect read. I wrote down 2 quotes for this book as well. So those were, "We are very good at pretending not to be in love. Maybe we are bad at showing it when we are allowed." And, "Sometimes I feel like I might scream. It's so hard keeping this secret. I love hockey and I deserve to have the career I want for as long as I want it. I've earned that, but if I had to choose, I'd choose him." And with that, we can finally move on to my January stats pages. In order to keep with the kind of journalesque vibe of my cover page, I decided to add the border I added to the cover page and also changed up the way I did all my numeric overall stats that kind of go in the top left of this spread. I kept the same font style I used on the cover page for the title of the page with the same dark brown. And then for each graph title, I did the first letter in that same font, but did the rest of the word in brush lettering so that the graph titles weren't taking up an obscene amount of space, but could still tie in with the rest of the page. For the smaller, just written stats, I usually have these all in one column, taking up half of the first page. But since I added these borders, I had less space to work with. And I also wanted to bring in some more of the more notebook journal vibes of the cover page. So instead, I made them a lot smaller and decided to make them look more like the little info areas I did on the cover page. So I did the titles in the same maroon color and kind of made them all overlap a bit. And I also used this same color to write the stats in cursive under the January title, and then wrote the actual statistics using my fountain pen. I've also updated favorite and least favorite reads to highest and lowest rated reads, and then one of my graphs I'm swapping out from age demographic to source. Then for the graphs, I used the 3 colors I used for the Phoenix on the cover page with my fake watercolor technique to color in the different graph slices. I also decided to label all the slices of the graph with my fountain pen instead of my usual Papermate Inkjoy black pen to tie it in a little extra with the cover page and the journal vibes and soften it up a bit. As for the actual January stats, I read 12 books in January, which were comprised of approximately 1,241,542 words. Those words spanned 4,245 pages and 536 audio minutes. My highest rated reads of the month were The Princess Knight, Heated Rivalry, Role Model, and The Long Game. And my lowest rated reads of the month were Slewfoot and Reclaim Me. For format, I read 2 physical, 9 digital, and 1 audio. For the source, I purchased 2 of the books, the 2 physical books. 2 of the books were from Kindle Unlimited. Those are the 2 New Haven books, and 8 of the books were from the library. For diversity and representation, 2 books had Black characters, 2 books had East Asian characters, 1 book had South Asian characters, and 1 book had MENA characters. 7 of the books featured Achillean relationships, 2 of the books had sapphic relationships, 2 of the books featured characters on the spectrum of asexuality, 3 books featured autistic characters, 2 of the books featured characters with invisible disabilities, and 2 of the books featured characters with emotional or psychiatric disabilities. For the invisible disabilities, one of the books had chronic illness, and one of the books had chronic pain. And then for the books with emotional or psychiatric disabilities, one of the books featured a character with anxiety, and one of the books features characters dealing with depression. As far as genre, 1 book was horror, 1 book was literary fiction, 9 books were romance, and 1 book was romantasy. For ratings, 1 book was a reread that I didn't re-rate. 2 books were 2.5 stars, 4 books were 3 stars, 1 book was 3.5 stars, and 4 books were 4.5 stars, giving me an average rating for the month of 3.54. For the author breakdown this month, 10 of the books were written by women, 1 of the books was written by a man, and 1 of the books was written by a non-binary author. 9 of the books were written by white authors, 1 of the books was written by a South Asian author, and 2 of the books were written by Black authors. This is quite a bit heavier on the white authors than I usually like, but that is mostly attributed to the fact that half of the books I read were written by a singular author within one series, so I'm okay with it and will just up my intention for the next few months to balance it out a bit. Before we flip through my January pages, we're going to jump back to the front of my journal to update a couple of pages. First, jumping into my goals page, I'm coloring in 1 finished series because I finished all the published New Haven books and I'm not planning to continue, along with the Lady Knights goal because of the Princess Knight. Next is my book tracker page. I need to color in the last 2 books in January. I only have a book cover to add for Role Model because I print these out in groups of 4, and I already had a couple of these printed out from starting them at the end of 2025, so I could finish the book tracker out in my last reading journal. And now here is a flip through of all my January pages. And finally, getting into this month, let's set up my February intro page. In case you're new here or didn't watch my January setup video, this whole year I'm planning to do the yearly pages all in this creature compendium journal kind of theme, with the general layout being mostly the same across all the intro pages, but changing up what creature is featured on each intro page. So for February, I decided I wanted to do a siren theme because sirens feel pretty romance adjacent in my opinion, and Valentine's Day and love and everything in February. I also decided I wanted to go with the more modern depiction of a siren, more in the mermaid vein, and kind of write down in the lore section that I'm going to do on each page how we got to this depiction, because I am a big Greek mythology girly, so I know that the original myth of the sirens is actually bird-like creatures, but I've never really looked into how we got from that original myth to the more mermaid depiction, and I thought it would be fun to incorporate that info into this spread. I'm starting off with all the line work across both pages, so the calendar outline, the borders, and the actual line work on the siren drawing. For the calendar, I did have to adjust this quite a bit since this month is insane in the way that it's lined up across the weeks, with it taking up exactly 4 weeks. For the borders, I mostly kept them the same as the previous month, but I decided I would do the corner decorations different for each month to kind of be themed to each creature. So last month, they were just like generally swirly corners, but this month, my corners are meant to look like little seashells. And then for the line art of the actual siren, I'm mostly using my O5 fine liner for everything, but then I also used my O3 fine liner for the little scales and some of the smaller details. Once all that line work is done, I'm also going into the month and creature titles with my O3 fine liner to do the thin lines on just the capital letters. Keeping with the previous month, I did the actual lettering besides those detail lines in a color to go with the theme instead of black so that the titles fit a bit more seamlessly into the page instead of being really bold and contrasting from the rest of the page. I kept the same font as last month and used this pretty medium tone and saturation blue for doing all the lettering for the two main titles. I probably should have waited until after I colored in the tail fins to do the bottom title because the water method I'm using for coloring that in made the lettering bleed quite a bit during the overlap, but it still looks fine. I just had to go over the lettering again after that had dried down, which you will see later. But now I know for future. Now that we've got all the line work and the main lettering done, it's time to go in and color this all in. I'm again using my water method with water-based markers for this. A quick rundown on this is you can take pretty much any water-based marker and lay it down on a shiny surface. I use an acrylic palette, but you can also use a plastic bag or a plastic paint palette, and then go back in with a brush and a little bit of water to pick up the color. This makes the color a bit less saturated and more soft, and also gets rid of the streakiness that lighter colors of water-based markers usually have. So starting with the fins, I did all the fins in a teal blue kind of color, a bit lighter than what I used for the titles. And you'll see here what I mean about the siren title bleeding and softening a bit when I was doing the tail fins here. I also used this color around her ear. She has a very fin-like ear, and there are some like tendons, I guess, around the ear so that it can have that shape. And I made those the same color as the fins so that the ear itself could be her skin color. Next up, we're moving into the tail. I decided to blend two colors together to give the tail some dimension. The bottom of the tail and then also her hands and lower forearms along with the kind of gills I drew in on her torso. I'm doing in this gray-green color first and then blending with this lighter seafoam kind of green, and then I carried that color up to her face as well. And lastly, it's time to take care of this mane of hair. I went in with a pretty dark blue for the hair just to give a bit of contrast between the lighter elements of her tail and skin. And I also have to go over the edges of those letters that overlap the tail fins to sharpen those back up. For the little info sections, I went with a green color so that this page had a little bit more green in it and wasn't only blue. Going back over to the calendar page, I'm drawing in my standard 6 rows per date to track how long it takes to read all the books in February, and I did the dates the same color blue as the page headers. And finally, we're going back in with some blue ink in my fountain pen to write in all my little facts I compiled for this page. For this page, my little sections are etymology, lore, origin, and power. I think for each month, I'll keep etymology, lore, and origin, and then the last category will be dependent on the creature and what interesting fun fact I want to write down. For lore, I wrote that sirens in Homer's Odyssey did not have a physical description, but eventually were depicted as human-headed birds, both men and women, which later shifted to just women. Sirens then shifted to tritonesses in the classical and Roman periods before mermaids emerged in Liber Monstorium and into the medieval period. For the origin, Greek, and specifically Homer's Odyssey as the first appearance. For etymology, the two Greek words that are thought to contribute to the original word for siren, which mean rope and join. And finally, for power, I wrote alluring voice tempts sailors overboard. And with that, the February intro page is complete. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you again soon.